She stood frozen in the loading dock as $120 million in gold bars stared back at her from inside. A vault hidden beneath rotting floorboards everyone said would collapse. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday morning, thick and official, bound with a rubber band that snapped when Jennifer Martinez tried to remove it. Her hands shook as she flipped through page after page of legal language that reduced 12 years of marriage to bullet points and clauses. The house went to Marcus. The savings account, what little remained of it, split down the middle. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The cars, both of them, his. And then, buried on page 47, a single line that made her pause. Party A relinquishes all claim to the Riverside Storage Warehouse, transferring full ownership to Party B. Jennifer read it 3 times, her coffee growing cold in her hand. The warehouse. She'd forgotten Marcus even owned it. No, that wasn't quite true. She'd tried to forget it. For years, that crumbling structure on the edge of town had been a source of arguments. Marcus had bought it at some sketchy auction 7 years ago, convinced he could flip it for a profit. He'd poured money into permits and inspections, into lawyers who promised development deals that never materialized. The warehouse had become a black hole, swallowing their savings and spitting back nothing but bills and broken promises. Now, it was hers. All hers. Jennifer almost laughed at the irony. Marcus had kept everything of value. The home they'd built together, the furniture, even the wedding china her grandmother had given them. But the warehouse? He couldn't get rid of it fast enough. "Mommy?" 10-year-old Emma stood in the doorway of their tiny rental apartment, school uniform wrinkled, backpack hanging off one shoulder. "Are you okay?" Jennifer folded the papers quickly, forcing a smile. "Yeah, baby. Just some boring grown-up stuff." "Is it about Daddy?" The question hit harder than it should have. Emma had stopped asking about her father months ago, after the 3rd time he'd cancelled his weekend visits, after the birthday he'd forgotten, after the promises that dissolved like sugar in rain. Sort of. But it's good news, actually. We got something in the divorce. Emma's eyes widened with hope. Jennifer immediately regretted sparking. "Did we get the house back?" "No, sweetie. We got a warehouse." "What's a warehouse?" "Like a really big garage." Emma's face fell. Even at 10, she understood that a garage, no matter how big, wasn't the same as a home. That evening, after her shift at Martinez Family Restaurant, the ironic name considering her family had just fallen apart, Jennifer sat at their kitchen table with her laptop. The apartment was cramped, a 1-bedroom where Emma slept on the bed and Jennifer took the pull-out couch. The walls were thin enough to hear their neighbors arguing, and the heater only worked when it felt like it. But it was theirs, paid for with money she earned herself. And that counted for something. She typed the warehouse address into Google Maps. The satellite image showed a sprawling structure, easily 40,000 square feet, sitting on 3 acres of cracked pavement. The building was L-shaped, constructed of cinder blocks and corrugated metal, with a flat roof that had seen better days. Most of the windows were either boarded up or broken. Weeds pushed through every crack in the parking lot. A rusted chain-link fence surrounded the property, sagging in places where vandals had cut through. The property records told a depressing story. Built in 1968 as a textile distribution center. Abandoned in 2003 when the company went bankrupt. Seized by the county for unpaid taxes in 2015. Auctioned to Marcus Martinez in 2018 for $12,000. Current assessed value, $8,500. Though Jennifer suspected even that was generous. 3 reviews existed. Online. All from urban explorers who'd broken in over the years. Creepy but empty. Watch out for the floor in the loading dock. Looks like it might cave in. Homeless people use it sometimes. Be careful. Jennifer rubbed her temples. Marcus had stuck her with a liability, pure and simple. The property taxes alone would be $4,000 a year. Insurance, if she could even get it, would be astronomical. And for what? A collapsing building in the worst part of town that no one wanted. The smart thing would be to walk away. Let the county take it back for unpaid taxes, cut her losses, and move on. But something nagged at her. Maybe it was stubbornness, the same trait that had kept her working double shifts when Marcus had lost his third job. Maybe it was the memory of how dismissive he'd been when she asked about it. That dump? You can have it. Worthless piece of junk. The contempt in his voice had stung more than the divorce itself. Or maybe, she thought as she looked around, their cramped apartment, at Emma's drawings taped to the walls, at the space heater they couldn't afford to run all winter, at the life they'd been reduced to. Maybe she just didn't have anything left to lose. "Emma," she called out, "how do you feel about going on an adventure this weekend?" Her daughter emerged from the bathroom, toothpaste foam on her chin. "What kind of adventure?" "We're going to check out our new warehouse." Emma's face lit up in a way Jennifer hadn't seen in months. "Can I bring my camera?" "One." Absolutely. That night, Jennifer lay awake on the pull-out couch, listening to the building settle and creak. The warehouse loomed in her mind, massive and unknowable. She told herself it was just a building, just cinder blocks and metal and forgotten space. But sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, she dreamed of vast, empty rooms and shadows that moved when she wasn't looking. Saturday morning broke cold and grey, the kind of November day that promised rain. Jennifer packed sandwiches and water bottles, flashlights, and a first aid kit. Emma, treating the whole thing like the adventure Jennifer had promised, wore her explorer vest, the one with all the pockets, and carried her plastic camera like a professional photographer. The drive took 40 minutes, leading them through the nice part of town where Jennifer used to live, past the downtown that was slowly gentrifying, and finally into the industrial district that had been dying since before Jennifer was born. Empty factories lined the streets, their windows like missing teeth. The few businesses still operating, an auto body shop, a scrap metal yard, a check cashing place, looked like they were hanging on by their fingernails. The warehouse sat at the end of Riverside Road, exactly as isolated and imposing as the satellite images had suggested. Jennifer pulled her battered Honda up to the gate, which hung open, the padlock long since cut away. Emma pressed her face to the window. "It's huge," she breathed. Huge didn't cover it. The building dominated the landscape, a monument to industry's heyday, now left to rot. The cinderblock walls were streaked with water damage and graffiti. The corrugated metal roof sagged in places. The loading dock, a covered concrete platform that ran the length of the back wall, looked like it might collapse under its own weight. Jennifer grabbed the keys the lawyer had given her, heavy and old-fashioned, and stepped out. The air smelled like rust and standing water. Broken glass crunched under her feet. Emma stayed close, her earlier excitement tempered by the reality of the place. The main entrance was a metal door, dented and covered in faded warning stickers. Jennifer tried 3 keys before finding the right one. The lock turned with a grinding sound, and the door swung open, hinges screaming. Inside was darkness. Jennifer clicked on her flashlight, the beam cutting through dust motes that hung in the air like a fog. The main floor stretched before them, a vast open space supported by steel beams. The concrete floor was cracked and stained, littered with debris, old pallets, rotting cardboard boxes, piles of trash left by squatters. Pigeons had nested in the rafters, their droppings covering everything like a layer of volcanic ash. But the bones were good. That's what Jennifer's father would have said. The steel beams were solid, no rust that she could see. The walls were straight. The roof, despite the sagging, was still up there. "Mom, look!" Emma pointed her camera at a section of wall where someone had spray-painted a beautiful mural, a phoenix rising from flames. The colors were faded, but still vibrant. The artist's skill evident even through years of neglect. Jennifer smiled. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Someone saw beauty here once. They explored slowly, carefully testing each step before committing their weight. The main floor held nothing but trash and memories. A break room still had a microwave covered in rust, and a table where workers had once eaten lunch. An office had filing cabinets, empty except for mouse nests. A bathroom that Jennifer decided they would not be using. The loading dock was accessed through a wide doorway at the back. The concrete platform was 30 feet deep and ran the entire length of the building, maybe 200 feet. Roll-up doors, all broken or stuck open, lined the outer wall. The floor was in terrible shape, just as the review had warned. Cracks spider-webbed across the surface, and in several places, sections of concrete had fallen away entirely, revealing darkness below. "Careful, Emma. Stay close to the wall." Emma nodded, suddenly serious, recognizing real danger when she saw it. Jennifer played her flashlight over the damaged floor, trying to gauge how bad it really was. The cracks were deep, and through some of them, she could see what looked like a gap, maybe a crawl space or an old drainage system. She knelt carefully at the edge of one large crack, shining her light into the darkness. Below, metal. Definitely metal down there. Probably old pipes or electrical conduit. "Mom, what's that?" Jennifer followed Emma's pointing finger to the far corner of the loading dock. There, partially hidden by a collapsed pallet rack, was a door. Unlike the others they'd seen, this one was steel. Industrial grade, with a keypad lock that looked far too modern for a building that had been abandoned for 20 years. Jennifer's pulse quickened. She picked her way across the broken concrete, testing each step, Emma following in her exact footsteps. The door was set into the cinder block wall, flush and professional. The keypad glowed faintly green when Jennifer touched it, meaning it had power, meaning someone had been maintaining it. "Why does an old warehouse have a locked room with electricity?" Emma whispered. "I don't know, baby." Jennifer tried the door handle. Locked, obviously. She examined the keypad, a standard 4-digit model. She tried the obvious combinations. 1,234. 0000. The year the warehouse was built, 1968. Nothing worked. She stepped back, studying the door, the walls around it, looking for any clue. That's when Emma tugged her sleeve. "Mom, there's numbers scratched into the wall." Jennifer looked where Emma pointed. Barely visible, someone had etched 4 numbers into the cinder block beside the door, worn smooth by time but still legible. 0527. May 27th. Emma's birthday. Jennifer's hands trembled as she punched in the code. The keypad beeped, green light flashing. A heavy lock disengaged with a mechanical thunk that echoed through the loading dock. The door swung open silently, revealing stairs leading down into darkness far deeper than any crawl space should be. Cool air rushed out, processed and clean, carrying the faint hum of machinery. Jennifer's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to close the door, to leave, to take Emma and run. But she'd spent too many years listening to fear, too many years playing it safe, while Marcus made reckless decisions that somehow always left her holding the consequences. "Stay right behind me," she told Emma. "If I say run, you run. Okay?" Emma nodded, eyes wide but trusting. Jennifer descended the stairs, her flashlight revealing concrete walls, painted institutional beige, cleaner than anything else in the building. The stairs went down one flight, then switched back for another, deeper than should be possible, deeper than made sense for a warehouse basement. At the bottom, they emerged into a corridor. Overhead lights flickered on automatically, responding to motion sensors. The hallway stretched ahead, doors on either side, each marked with faded placards. Storage A, Storage B, Climate Control, Generator. This doesn't make sense. Jennifer breathed. Why would a textile warehouse need something like this? The corridor ended at a heavy vault door, the kind Jennifer had only seen in movies. This one was partially open, as if someone had left in a hurry and forgotten to seal it completely. The door was 2 feet thick, all steel, with a wheel lock mechanism straight out of a bank heist film. Jennifer approached slowly, Emma's hand gripping the back of her jacket. She put her shoulder against the door and pushed. It swung open smoothly, too smoothly, the hinges freshly oiled. Beyond was a room that made Jennifer's knees weak. It was vast, climate-controlled, and filled with metal shelving units that stretched from floor to ceiling. And on those shelves, stacked in neat rows, organized with military precision, were gold bars. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Each one stamped with official markings she recognized from movies and news reports. Fort Knox, U.S. Treasury, Federal Reserve. Jennifer couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room spun around her as she tried to process what she was seeing. "Mom," Emma whispered, her voice tiny and scared. "Is that real gold?" Jennifer moved forward on legs that felt disconnected from her body. She reached out, touching one of the bars. It was cold, heavy, undeniably real. She picked it up, grunting at the weight. 27 pounds, if she remembered correctly, and at today's prices, worth roughly $500,000. She looked around the room, her mind trying to calculate, trying to make sense of it. 3 walls of shelving, each 10 feet high, each shelf holding approximately 40 bars. The numbers made her dizzy. $120 million, maybe more. Scattered on the floor near the vault door were papers, documents that looked like they'd been dropped in haste. Jennifer picked one up with shaking hands. It was a manifest, dated 1971, listing transfers of gold reserves from Fort Knox to various secure facilities, classified, eyes only, and at the bottom, a destination that made her blood run cold. Riverside Storage Facility, Emergency Reserve Location 7. Emma was crying softly, overwhelmed. Jennifer pulled her daughter close, trying to make sense of what they'd found. This warehouse, the dump Marcus had been so eager to give away, was a secret government facility. A hidden vault built during the Cold War, probably meant to protect gold reserves in case of nuclear war or economic collapse. And everyone had forgotten about it. The government, the county, Marcus. Everyone, except whoever had installed that keypad lock and maintained the climate control system. Someone knew. Someone had been protecting this. Jennifer's phone buzzed in her pocket, making them both jump. She pulled it out, seeing a text from her neighbor. "Everything okay? You said you'd be back by lunch." Reality crashed back. Jennifer looked at Emma, at the fear and confusion in her daughter's face, at the gold bars surrounding them, at the weight of an impossible decision settling onto her shoulders. They could take some, just a few bars. Enough to change their lives. To get Emma into a good school, to buy a house, to never worry about money again. Who would know? The government had forgotten this place existed. Marcus certainly didn't know what he'd given away. But even as the temptation whispered its promises, Jennifer thought of Emma watching her every move. Emma, who still believed in good guys and bad guys, in right and wrong, in the idea that her mother was someone worth admiring. Jennifer knelt down, meeting her daughter's eyes. "Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What we found here, it doesn't belong to us. Do you understand?" Emma nodded slowly. "We're going to do the right thing, even though it's hard, even though it might mean we don't get anything out of this, because that's what good people do." "I know, Mommy." Emma's voice was small but steady. "You always do the right thing." The trust in those words nearly broke Jennifer. She hugged Emma tight, then stood, taking one last look at the vault that could have solved every problem in their lives. "Come on, baby. We need to make some phone calls." They climbed back up the stairs, through the broken loading dock, into the grey November afternoon. As Jennifer drove away from the warehouse, she looked in the rearview mirror at Emma, who was already pulling out her sketchbook, processing the adventure in the only way she knew how. Jennifer had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time since the divorce papers had arrived, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like herself. The phone in Jennifer's hand felt heavier than any gold bar as she sat in her car outside the warehouse, Emma beside her, both of them still trying to process what they'd just discovered. The grey afternoon light filtered through the windshield, making everything feel unreal, dreamlike, as if they might wake up and find the whole thing had been an elaborate fantasy. But the keys to the warehouse were still in her hand. The vault was still down there, humming with climate-controlled air, protecting a fortune that didn't belong to her. Jennifer pulled up the search on her phone. Who do you call when you find $120 million in government gold? The FBI? The Treasury Department? The police? She started with the obvious choice and dialed 911. 911. What's your emergency? This isn't exactly an emergency, Jennifer began, then stopped, realizing how insane she was about to sound. I just discovered a vault full of gold bars in a warehouse I inherited. Government gold. From the Cold War, I think. The silence on the other end lasted so long, Jennifer thought the call had dropped. Ma'am, have you been drinking? No, I swear I'm serious. There's a hidden basement under my warehouse with over $100 million in gold bars. They have treasury markings and documents that say it's some kind of emergency reserve location. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay where you are. Don't touch anything. Officers are on their way. The first patrol car arrived within 15 minutes. 2 officers who looked like they'd drawn the short straw, responding to a crazy call. Jennifer could see the skepticism written all over their faces as she explained what she'd found. But something in her demeanor, the way Emma clutched her hand, the keys she held out as proof, made them follow her back inside. When they emerged from the vault 40 minutes later, both officers' faces had gone white. One immediately got on his radio, his voice shaking. Dispatch, we need federal agencies at this location. Immediately. Everything she said is true. After that, it became a blur. More police arrived, creating a perimeter. FBI agents in dark suits pulled up in black SUVs. Treasury Department officials flew in from Washington. The warehouse that had been abandoned and forgotten for 2 decades became the center of a controlled chaos that reminded Jennifer of disaster movies. All official voices and urgent whispers, and people in positions of authority, trying to maintain the illusion of control. They separated Jennifer and Emma, gently but firmly, taking statements in different patrol cars. Jennifer watched through the window as a kind-faced female agent sat with Emma, probably making sure their stories matched, making sure this wasn't some elaborate fraud. The lead FBI agent, a woman named Director Sarah Chen, approached Jennifer's patrol car as evening began to fall. She slid into the passenger seat, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Martinez. Miss Martinez. The divorce just finalized. Miss Martinez, I need to know exactly how you came to own this property. Jennifer explained everything. The divorce. Marcus buying the warehouse at auction 7 years ago. His frustration at not being able to develop it. The way he'd practically thrown it at her in the settlement just to be rid of it. Director Chen listened without interrupting, taking notes on a tablet. When Jennifer finished, Chen sat back, studying her carefully. Do you know what you've found? Emergency gold reserves. More than that. During the Cold War, the government created dozens of secure facilities, like this one across the country. Hidden vaults where we could protect national treasures, gold reserves, important documents, in case of nuclear attack. This facility was decommissioned in 1992 after the Soviet Union fell, but through a series of bureaucratic failures, it was never properly cleared out. Somehow, it fell through the cracks, the records were lost or misfiled, and when the property was sold by the county, No one remembered what was underneath. So, the gold is yours? The government's, I mean. Chen smiled slightly. It's more complicated than that. The gold legally belongs to the treasury, but you are the legal owner of the property where it was found. And more importantly, you did the right thing by reporting it immediately. A lot of people wouldn't have. My daughter was watching me, Jennifer said simply. I couldn't teach her that stealing was okay, even if everyone had forgotten it existed. Over the next 3 days, the warehouse became a secure federal site. Army trucks arrived to transport the gold. Federal archivists catalogued every document. Structural engineers examined the hidden facility, marveling at construction that had survived decades without maintenance. Jennifer and Emma were asked to stay available, but told they couldn't discuss what they'd found with anyone. The story would break eventually, but the government wanted to control the narrative, to avoid panic or speculation. On the 4th day, Jennifer received a call asking her to come to a federal building downtown. She arranged for her neighbor to watch Emma, then drove to an imposing concrete structure that looked like it had been designed to intimidate. Director Chen met her in a conference room, along with several other official-looking people who introduced themselves, but whose titles Jennifer immediately forgot. Too much alphabet soup. FBI, Treasury, GSA, DOJ. Miss Martinez, Chen began. We've completed our preliminary assessment of the situation. The gold and related materials have been secured and will be returned to federal custody. The facility itself has significant historical value, and we're in discussions about preserving it. Jennifer nodded, waiting for the other shoe to drop. This was the part where they'd thank her and send her on her way, leaving her with nothing but a broken warehouse and a story no one would believe. However, Chen continued, there's the matter of compensation. You reported a find that, legally, you could have claimed a portion of under federal finders' laws. More significantly, you did so immediately, without attempting to profit from the discovery. That kind of civic integrity is rare. One of the Treasury officials, a stern woman with silver hair, leaned forward. The federal government is prepared to offer you a finder's fee of $5 million, tax-free. Additionally, we'll purchase the warehouse property from you at fair market value, plus an additional premium for your cooperation. Jennifer's vision blurred. $5 million for doing nothing except not being a thief. There's more, Chen said, and something in her voice made Jennifer focus. We've completed background checks as part of our investigation. We know about your ex-husband, about how he acquired the property, about the circumstances of your divorce. Jennifer's stomach tightened. What about Marcus? Your ex-husband purchased the warehouse at a county auction in 2018. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that there were federal liens on the property, dating back to 1992, when the facility was supposed to be decommissioned. Those liens were never properly filed at the county level, another bureaucratic failure. But they still exist, which means the sale to your ex-husband was technically invalid. I don't understand. The Treasury official smiled thinly. It means your ex-husband never legally owned the property. He paid $12,000 for a building the government still had claim to. However, since the error was on our end, we're prepared to reimburse him for his purchase price and any taxes he paid. But the warehouse was transferred to me in the divorce, Jennifer said, trying to follow the legal maze. Yes, and that's where it gets interesting. You accepted the property in good faith, unaware of the federal interest. You then discovered a significant federal asset and immediately reported it, demonstrating extraordinary civic responsibility. Based on all these factors, the Justice Department has decided that you are entitled to the finder's fee and the property purchase price as originally stated. Your ex-husband will receive a refund of his original investment and nothing more. Jennifer felt something fierce and bright bloom in her chest. Marcus had thrown the warehouse at her like it was garbage, one last dismissive gesture in a marriage filled with them. And now that garbage had turned into the freedom she'd been fighting for. There's one more thing, Director Chen said. "This story is going to break. We can hold off the media for a few more days, but eventually, everyone will know what you found and what you did. Are you prepared for that?" Jennifer thought of Emma, of the cramped apartment, of the double shifts at the restaurant, of every time Marcus had made her feel small and worthless. "I think I can handle it." The press conference happened 5 days later, in a federal building downtown, with Jennifer standing at a podium flanked by FBI and Treasury officials. Emma sat in the front row, dressed in her Sunday best, beaming with pride at her mother. Jennifer told the story simply, leaving out the emotional weight, sticking to facts. She'd inherited a warehouse. She'd explored it with her daughter. They'd found a Cold War-era vault. She'd immediately contacted authorities. The questions came rapid fire, shouted by dozens of reporters. "What was your first thought when you saw the gold? How does it feel to have found $120 million? What are you going to do with the finder's fee?" Jennifer answered honestly. She'd been shocked, she'd been tempted, but she'd known it wasn't hers to take. And as for the money, she planned to make sure her daughter had everything she needed, to finally stop living paycheck to paycheck, to maybe help other single mothers who were struggling the way she had been. One reporter, from the local paper, asked the question that cut closest to the bone. "Your ex-husband transferred the warehouse to you in the divorce. Does he have any claim to the finder's fee?" Director Chen stepped up to the microphone before Jennifer could answer. "No. The property was legally transferred to Miss Martinez. She made the discovery. She reported it. The compensation is hers alone." The murmur that went through the press corps was audible. This wasn't just a Cold War treasure story. It was a divorce story, an underdog story, a justice story. The next morning, Jennifer woke to her phone, exploding with messages. The story had gone national. Single mother discovers $120 million gold vault. Ex-husband gives away warehouse. Loses fortune. Woman chooses integrity over riches. Her restaurant job called, not to fire her, but to tell her she didn't need to come in, that they understood she'd probably want time to process everything. Her landlord called to congratulate her and offer her more time if she needed it before moving out. Emma's school called to make sure Emma was okay, that the attention wasn't too overwhelming. But it was Marcus's call that Jennifer had been both dreading and anticipating. She let it go to voicemail 3 times before finally answering. "You have to be kidding me," were his first words. "No, hello, no congratulations, just rage barely contained. You found $120 million in gold, and I get nothing? You transferred the property to me, Marcus. You said it was worthless, remember? I didn't know there was a fortune buried underneath. Neither did I. But I found it, and I reported it. If, you'd kept the warehouse, you could have done the same. They're giving you $5 million. That should be half mine." Jennifer felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. This was the Marcus she'd been married to, the one who appeared whenever money was involved, demanding, entitled, convinced the world owed him something. "The lawyers have already explained it to you. The property transfer was legal. What I found after you gave up all claim to it. You get nothing. This is bullshit. I'll sue. Go ahead. I have the best lawyers in the country ready to defend me, courtesy of the federal government. They've made it very clear that you have no legal standing." The silence on the other end was satisfying in a way Jennifer hadn't expected. "You know what the worst part is, Marcus? You had this the whole time. 7 years, you owned that warehouse. You could have explored it properly, could have found what was underneath. But you didn't. You were too busy calling it a dump. Too busy blaming it for your failures. Too busy trying to flip it for a quick profit. You never saw its value, because you never looked." She hung up before he could respond, blocking his number immediately after. Emma, who'd been listening from the doorway, ran over and hugged her. "I'm proud of you, Mummy." Jennifer held her daughter close, feeling the weight of years of struggle finally lifting from her shoulders. "I'm proud of us, baby." The finder's fee was deposited into Jennifer's account exactly 2 weeks after the press conference. She stared at the number on her phone, the zeros that changed everything, and felt both exhilarated and terrified. Money solved problems, but it also created new ones. She'd seen what wealth had done to Marcus, how it had twisted his priorities and poisoned his judgment. She wouldn't let that happen to Emma. She wouldn't let that happen to herself. Her first call was to her lawyer, a competent woman named Patricia who'd helped her navigate the divorce. They set up trusts, college funds, investments, protections to ensure the money would last, that Emma would have security no matter what happened. Her second call was to a real estate agent, not to buy a mansion, but to find a modest house in a good school district, something with a yard where Emma could play, something they could actually call home. The house they found was perfect. 3 bedrooms, a small garden, a neighborhood with sidewalks and kids riding bikes. When Emma saw her room, painted yellow with windows that looked out on a maple tree, she cried happy tears. Jennifer cried too, remembering all the years in cramped apartments, all the nights Emma had slept on a pull-out couch, all the dreams she'd thought were impossible. But the money wasn't just for them. Jennifer remembered too clearly what it felt like to be drowning in bills, to choose between medicine and groceries, to smile at your child while terror gnawed at your insides. She established a foundation with $500,000 of the finder's fee, dedicated to helping single mothers in crisis. Rent assistance, job training, childcare, all the things she desperately needed and couldn't access. She called it Emma's Hope Foundation and made her daughter part of the board, teaching her that wealth meant responsibility, that having enough meant helping others who didn't. The community response was overwhelming. Women reached out, sharing their stories, thanking her for understanding, for seeing them. Job offers poured in, not because she needed to work, but because people wanted to be associated with the woman who'd chosen integrity over greed. She turned most of them down, but accepted a position on the board of a women's shelter, using her story to raise awareness and funds. The warehouse itself became something unexpected. The federal government, recognizing its historical significance, designated it as a historic site. They offered to sell it back to Jennifer for a symbolic $1, with the understanding that the underground vault would be preserved as a museum to Cold War history. Jennifer accepted, then donated the entire property to a non-profit that would manage it. The museum opened 6 months later, attracting history buffs, school groups, and curious tourists. The broken loading dock was repaired, reinforced, and turned into an event space. The main floor became gallery space, telling the story of Cold War paranoia, secret preparations, and the systems built to survive the unthinkable. Emma's photograph, the one she'd taken of the Phoenix mural on that first day, hung in the museum entrance, a reminder that beauty could be found even in ruins. 1 year after discovering the vault, Jennifer stood in the warehouse, now transformed, watching families explore exhibits and children press their faces against glass cases containing replicas of the gold bars. Emma stood beside her, taller now, more confident, wearing a volunteer badge as she helped guide a school tour. Director Chen found them there, smiling at the transformation. "Quite different from that first day." "Everything's different," Jennifer agreed. "You know, we've been studying what happened with this facility, how it got lost in the bureaucracy. It's actually led to a complete audit of Cold War-era sites. We've found 3 more facilities that were never properly decommissioned. None of them had your gold reserves, but one had art collections. Another had documents that historians thought were lost. You finding this place may have saved decades' worth of history." Jennifer shook her head, amazed. "I just wanted to see what Marcus had stuck me with. And instead you found something priceless. Not just the gold, but the reminder of what integrity looks like." Chen paused. "Can I ask you something personal? Do you regret it? Calling us instead of taking the gold?" Jennifer looked at Emma laughing with a group of kids as she pointed out exhibits. She thought about the house with the yellow bedroom and the maple tree. She thought about the women the foundation had helped, the families who now had hope. She thought about being able to look her daughter in the eye and know she'd taught her the right lesson. Not for a second. That evening, as they drove home through streets that felt safer now, Emma asked the question Jennifer had been waiting for. "Mum, do you think Daddy knew about the gold?" Jennifer considered lying, protecting Marcus from Emma's judgment, but she'd built their new life on truth, and she wouldn't undermine it now. "No, baby, I don't think he knew. But here's the thing. Even if he had found it, I'm not sure he would have done what we did. Because he would have kept it? Maybe. Or maybe he would have done the right thing for the wrong reasons, to look good, or to get credit. What matters is that we did the right thing because it was right. Do you understand the difference? Do you understand?" Emma nodded slowly. Doing good things to be good is better than doing good things to look good. Exactly. They pulled into their driveway, the porch light glowing warm and welcoming. As they walked to the door, Emma slipped her hand into Jennifer's. "Mom, I'm glad Daddy gave you the warehouse." Jennifer squeezed her daughter's hand. "Me too, baby. Me too." Inside, they made dinner together. A luxury Jennifer still hadn't gotten used to. Having time, having ingredients, having a kitchen that was theirs. Emma chatted about school, about the science project she was planning, about the friend who wanted to come over for a sleepover. After Emma went to bed, Jennifer sat in her home office, the one luxury she'd allowed herself, and reviewed applications for the foundation. Single mother, 2 kids, facing eviction. Single mother, recent widow, medical bills crushing her. Single mother, escaping abuse, needing a safe start. Each story was familiar. Each one could have been hers if not for a twist of fate and a hidden vault. She approved grants for all of them, knowing the money would change their lives the way her finder's fee had changed hers. It wasn't about the amount. It was about the breathing room, the choice, the ability to lift your head up long enough to see a future. Her phone buzzed with an email. The museum was requesting an interview for a documentary about the warehouse discovery. Jennifer smiled, making a mental note to involve Emma, to let her tell her side of the story. Because it wasn't just Jennifer's story anymore. It was theirs together. A single mother and her daughter who'd walked into a broken building and found both a fortune and a choice. Who'd chosen integrity when greed would have been easier. Who'd turned a Cold War relic into hope for people who needed it most. The warehouse had been meant to protect America's gold in case of disaster. Instead, it had saved Jennifer and Emma from their own personal disaster, not by making them rich, though it had done that too, but by giving them a chance to prove who they really were. Marcus had called it a dump, worthless, a liability he couldn't wait to be rid of. He'd been wrong. The warehouse had been the most valuable thing he ever owned, but he'd never bothered to look beneath the surface, never bothered to see past his own disappointment and frustration. Jennifer understood now that his biggest failure wasn't buying a bad property or losing money on a bad investment. His biggest failure was not seeing value unless it was obvious, not recognizing potential unless it announced itself loudly. She thought about that as she turned off the office light and checked on Emma one more time before bed. Her daughter slept peacefully, surrounded by books and drawings, by evidence of a childhood that included security and love and possibility. They'd found $120 million in gold beneath a loading dock everyone said would collapse. But the real treasure had been the choice itself, the moment when Jennifer had knelt down and told Emma they would do the right thing. That single decision had changed everything, not just their bank account, but who they were, who Emma would grow up to be. In the darkness of her bedroom, Jennifer smiled at the ceiling. Marcus had given her a warehouse he'd called worthless, trying to hurt her one last time, trying to burden her with his failure. Instead, he'd given her everything: a home, a purpose, a future, and the satisfaction of knowing that when it mattered most, She'd been exactly who she wanted to be. The warehouse sat on Riverside Road, no longer abandoned, no longer forgotten. Lights glowed in its windows. Voices echoed in its halls. Children learned history where gold had once been hidden. And somewhere in the city, in a modest house with a yellow bedroom and a maple tree, a mother and daughter slept safely, knowing they'd found something more valuable than any vault could hold. They'd found themselves. And that was worth more than all the gold in the world. 6 months later, on a spring morning, that promised new beginnings, Jennifer returned to the warehouse for a special event. The museum was hosting a ceremony to honor Cold War veterans and commemorate the facility's transformation from secret vault to public treasure. Emma walked beside her, wearing the volunteer shirt she'd earned through months of weekend work at the museum. She'd become something of a junior curator, helping with school groups, learning the history, taking pride in the role her mother had played in preserving it all. The parking lot that had once been cracked and overgrown was now smoothly paved, lined with young trees. The building's exterior had been restored, the graffiti removed, the windows repaired. It looked alive again. Purposeful, like it had found its reason for existing after decades of abandonment. Inside, the transformation was even more dramatic. The main floor that had been filled with trash and pigeon droppings now housed carefully curated exhibits. Interactive displays taught visitors about Cold War history. Photographs lined the walls, showing the facility during its active years, then its abandonment, and finally its rediscovery. The centerpiece exhibit was the vault itself. Visitors could descend the stairs, just as Jennifer and Emma had that first day, experiencing the surprise of discovering something hidden. The vault door stood open, and inside, behind protective glass, sat replica gold bars alongside the actual documents Jennifer had found. Monitors displayed interviews with historians, with Treasury officials, with Jennifer herself, telling the story of the facility's creation, loss, and recovery. Jennifer watched visitors move through the exhibits, saw children's eyes widen with wonder, heard parents explain to their kids what the Cold War had been, why people had been so afraid they'd hidden gold underground. She felt a strange pride, knowing she'd played a part in preserving this slice of history. Director Chen found her in the crowd, bringing with her an elderly man in a worn suit who leaned heavily on a cane. "Miss Martinez, I'd like you to meet someone special. This is Robert Henley. He was one of the original engineers who helped build this facility back in 1968. Robert's eyes were watery with age, but they sharpened as he looked at Jennifer. "I never thought I'd see this place again," he said, his voice trembling. "We worked in such secrecy, couldn't tell our families what we were building. For decades, I wondered if anyone would ever know what we'd created here, if it would just rot away, forgotten." "It almost did," Jennifer admitted. "If circumstances had been just slightly different, the county might have demolished it, and no one would have known. But you found it, and you protected it." Robert gripped her hand with surprising strength. "Do you know how rare that is? Most people, faced with that much gold, would have taken at least some, would have convinced themselves they deserved it. But you didn't. You saw beyond the immediate value to the historical importance. I just did what felt right." "Exactly," Robert smiled. "That's what makes it so remarkable. You didn't overthink it or rationalize. You just knew. The world needs more people like you, Miss Martinez." As Robert moved on to tour the facility he'd helped build half a century ago, Emma tugged Jennifer's sleeve. "Mom, that reporter wants to talk to you again." Jennifer suppressed a sigh. The media attention had mostly died down, but it flared up whenever there was a new development with the warehouse. This ceremony was apparently newsworthy enough to bring out local television. The interview was brief, mostly softball questions about how it felt to see the warehouse transformed, about the foundation she'd started, about what advice she'd give others who might find themselves in similar situations. Jennifer answered honestly. though she privately doubted anyone else would ever stumble into $120 million in Cold War gold. When the reporter asked about Marcus, about whether he'd reached out since the story broke, Jennifer kept her response simple. The divorce is final. We've both moved on. I hope he's doing well. She didn't mention the lawsuit he'd filed and subsequently dropped when his lawyers explained he had no case. She didn't mention the angry voicemails she'd had to block. She didn't mention seeing him interviewed by a tabloid, claiming he'd always planned to explore the warehouse more thoroughly, that Jennifer had gotten lucky with timing. There was no point in airing that bitterness publicly. It would only hurt Emma, and Emma deserved to remember her father without the stain of his worst moments. The ceremony continued with speeches from Treasury officials, from local politicians who took credit for supporting the museum despite having initially opposed it, from historians who'd studied the facility. Emma dozed against Jennifer's shoulder during the longer speeches, warm and trusting, and Jennifer felt a wave of contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was enough. This moment, this peace, this security. The money had made it possible, but the choice had made it real. She'd chosen integrity over greed, transparency over deception, and in doing so, had built a foundation stronger than any vault. After the ceremony, as crowds filtered out and volunteers began breaking down chairs, Jennifer and Emma walked through the museum one more time. They stopped at the exhibit, showing the loading dock's transformation, looking at before and after photos that seemed to document two different buildings. "It's weird to think it looked like that when we found it," Emma said, studying the image of broken concrete and shadows. "I remember being scared the floor would collapse. It almost did, in a few places. But you kept exploring anyway." Jennifer thought about that. "I guess I did. Maybe I was being reckless, bringing you down there. Or maybe you knew there was something worth finding." Emma looked up at her mother, with eyes that held more wisdom than 10 years should allow. "You always know, Mom. When something matters, when something's worth the risk. You always know." They walked outside into the spring afternoon, the sun warm on their faces. The museum parking lot was emptying, visitors returning to their lives, carrying with them stories about Cold War secrets and hidden gold, and the single mother who'd done the right thing. Jennifer's phone rang. Patricia, her lawyer. "Hey, just wanted to give you a heads up. The IRS finished their audit of the finder's fee. Everything checks out perfectly. You're officially clear, no questions outstanding." That's a relief. More than you know. There was some concern that Marcus might try to challenge the tax treatment, claim it was community property or something equally absurd. But his legal team apparently convinced him he'd already lost that fight. "You're done, Jennifer. Free and clear. Free and clear." The words resonated as Jennifer ended the call. She stood in the parking lot, where she'd first pulled up 6 months ago, full of dread and low expectations, and marveled at how completely her life had changed. Emma was already at the car, loading her backpack, chattering about plans for the weekend. They had a birthday party to attend tomorrow. A friend's mother who Jennifer had met through the foundation, a single mum who'd received a grant and used it to launch a small business. Next weekend, they were volunteering at the women's shelter. The weekend after, Emma had a sleepover planned with 3 friends from her new school. Their calendar was full in a way it had never been, when every moment was consumed by survival. They had time now, space to breathe, room to be something other than desperate. As Jennifer drove home, Emma fell asleep in the passenger seat, head tilted against the window. Jennifer glanced at her daughter, at the peace on her face, and understood finally why she'd made the right choice in that vault. It wasn't about the money, though the money helped. It wasn't about the recognition, though that had opened doors. It was about being able to look at Emma and know, with absolute certainty, that she'd taught her daughter the most important lesson anyone could learn. Your character is what you do when no one's watching, when there's no reward waiting, when the only judge is the person you see in the mirror. Jennifer had been judged by that person in that vault, with $120 million in gold surrounding her, and a daughter watching her every move. And she'd passed the test, not perfectly, not without temptation, but ultimately, definitively passed. That was worth more than any finder's fee. That was the real treasure she'd discovered beneath the broken loading dock. The house was warm when they arrived home, the security system disarming with a friendly beep, the lights coming on automatically. Emma trudged upstairs to her room, exhausted from the day's excitement. Jennifer made herself tea and sat in her office, looking at the latest foundation reports. 27 families helped in the last quarter. 12 women placed in job training programs. 5 emergency rent payments that had prevented evictions. 3 families relocated from abusive situations into safe housing. Each number represented lives changed, crises averted, hope restored. The foundation had cost her $500,000 of the finder's fee, but it had generated $300,000 in matching donations from people inspired by her story. They'd help nearly 100 families by year's end, and the endowment would ensure the work continued long after Jennifer was gone. She thought about Marcus, probably sitting in his apartment, bitter about the fortune he'd given away. She didn't hate him, didn't wish him harm. She just hoped, someday, he'd understand that value wasn't always monetary, that worth couldn't always be calculated in a bank statement. The warehouse had been worth exactly what both of them had brought to it. Marcus had brought resentment and dismissiveness, seeing only a failed investment and a burden to offload. So that's what he got. A refund of his $12,000 and the satisfaction of being rid of a problem. Jennifer had brought curiosity and courage, seeing possibility even in ruins, being willing to explore beyond the obvious. And she'd found history, treasure, purpose, transformation. Not because the gold had been waiting for her specifically, but because she'd been willing to look beyond surface value to deeper meaning. As she prepared for bed that night, checking on Emma one last time, Jennifer paused at her daughter's door. Emma had hung a photo on her wall, one taken at the museum ceremony, mother and daughter standing in front of the vault entrance, smiling, confident, transformed. Below it, Emma had taped a handwritten note in her careful child's script. "My mom found treasure and gave it back. That's what heroes do." Jennifer's vision blurred with tears. She'd been called many things since the discovery. Lucky, honest, noble, foolish, by some who thought she should have kept the gold. But hero from her daughter, that was the title that mattered most. She'd found $120 million in a warehouse, everyone called worthless. But the real discovery had been learning that she was strong enough to walk away from a fortune, wise enough to see beyond immediate gain, and brave enough to teach her daughter that integrity was priceless. The warehouse still stood on Riverside Road, no longer a monument to abandonment, but a testament to transformation. Visitors came from across the country to see where history had been hidden and recovered. School children learned about Cold War fears and modern integrity. Historians studied documents that had been lost for decades, and in a modest house with a yellow bedroom and a maple tree, a mother and daughter built a life on a foundation of truth. They had enough money to never worry again, but they didn't let wealth define them. They had fame, but they used it to help others. They had a story people couldn't believe, but they remained grounded in the simple truth that had guided them from the start. Do the right thing, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Because your character is what you do when no one's watching. And someone is always watching. Sometimes that someone is your daughter. And that's when it matters most. Jennifer had inherited a broken warehouse in a bitter divorce. Marcus had thought he was burdening her with worthless property, getting the last word, proving one final time that she was getting the worse end of things. Instead, he'd given her everything, the chance to prove her worth, the opportunity to teach her daughter the most important lesson of her life, the foundation for a future built on integrity rather than resentment. The warehouse had indeed been treasure, just not the kind Marcus had been looking for. And that difference, Jennifer understood now, was the whole point. 6 months later, Jennifer stood in her foundation office, reviewing applications from women who reminded her so much of her past self. The office wasn't fancy, just a small suite in a building near Emma's school. But it was theirs, earned and maintained with the finder's fee, that kept proving its worth every day. Her phone buzzed with a call from Director Chen. They'd kept in touch, an unlikely friendship born from extraordinary circumstances. "Jennifer, I wanted to give you a heads up. The Treasury Department is honoring you next month in Washington. The Secretary wants to present you with a commendation for civic duty." Jennifer felt the familiar discomfort with public recognition. Is that really necessary? I just reported what I found. That's exactly why it's necessary. In a country where people sue over spilled coffee and look for any angle to profit, you walked away from $120 million and asked for nothing. That deserves recognition. I didn't ask for nothing. I got $5 million, which you've used to help nearly 200 families and preserve a historic site. I'd say that counts as nothing in terms of personal gain. Chen paused. Will you accept? Jennifer thought about Emma, about the lesson this would teach her, about standing in front of her daughter one more time and showing her that doing the right thing matters. I'll accept. The ceremony in Washington was smaller than Jennifer expected, held in a Treasury Department conference room rather than some grand hall. But the people present mattered. Officials who dealt with fraud and theft daily, who'd become cynical about human nature, who looked at her like she was a puzzle they couldn't quite solve. The Secretary of the Treasury, an elegant woman in her 60s, presented Jennifer with a framed commendation and a handshake that conveyed genuine respect. "Miss Martinez, in my 30 years in public service, I can count on one hand the number of people who've done what you did. Most people, when faced with that much wealth, find reasons why they deserve it, why the government won't miss it, why their situation justifies taking just a little. You didn't rationalize. You reported. That integrity is increasingly rare, and we want to honor it." Emma, dressed in her best outfit and beaming with pride, accepted a special Youth Citizenship Award for her role in the discovery. "I just followed my mum," she said when asked to speak. "She always does the right thing, even when it's hard." The room full of jaded federal officials gave her a standing ovation. After the ceremony, as they toured Washington's monuments and museums, Emma held Jennifer's hand and asked the question she'd been building toward for months. "Mom, do you think Daddy regrets giving you the warehouse?" It was the first time in a while that Emma had brought up Marcus. Jennifer chose her words carefully. "I think your father regrets not finding what was underneath, but I'm not sure he regrets giving it to me, because in his mind, it was worthless. He saw a broken building and couldn't imagine it being anything else. But you saw something different. I saw possibility. Not the gold. I didn't know that was there. But I saw space, structure, something that could be transformed with enough work and vision. Your father stopped looking after the surface disappointed him. I kept looking because I didn't have a choice. I needed that building to be something, so I was willing to dig deeper." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing. "Is that why you found the gold? Because you were willing to keep looking?" "Maybe. Or maybe it was just luck. But here's what I learned. Treasure isn't always what you're looking for. Sometimes the real treasure is who you become while you're searching." They flew home the next evening, both exhausted but content. Emma fell asleep against Jennifer's shoulder on the plane, clutching her citizenship award, and Jennifer felt a profound gratitude for the series of accidents that had led them here. Marcus buying a warehouse he couldn't develop, the divorce settlement that had given it to her, the broken loading dock that had revealed stairs going down, the keypad with Emma's birthday. Each piece had been necessary, and each had felt like disaster at the time. But disaster and opportunity often looked the same, until you were far enough away to see the whole picture. What had seemed like Marcus sticking her with a worthless burden had actually been him handing her the keys to a better future. He just hadn't known it. And that, Jennifer thought, was the saddest part of the whole story. Back home, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Emma thrived in school, making friends easily, joining clubs, bringing home report cards that made Jennifer weep with pride. The foundation grew, hiring 2 part-time staff members, partnering with other organizations, expanding its reach beyond what Jennifer had imagined possible. The Warehouse Museum became a fixture in the city's cultural landscape, hosting events, school field trips, and academic conferences. Scholars came from around the world to study the facility, to understand how Cold War infrastructure had been built, hidden, and forgotten. And Jennifer, for the first time in her adult life, had the luxury of choice. She could work or not work. She could volunteer or relax. She could plan for Emma's future without the constant terror of unexpected bills or medical emergencies. The freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying, removing the structure of survival that had defined her for so long. She chose to stay busy, but now her busyness had purpose beyond just earning enough to survive. She served on non-profit boards, mentored single mothers through the foundation, spoke at conferences about civic responsibility and integrity. She became, somewhat reluctantly, a minor public figure, known for the warehouse discovery and the choice she'd made afterward. But she never forgot where she'd come from, never forgot what it felt like to choose between groceries and medicine, to lie awake calculating whether she could afford new shoes for Emma, to smile at her daughter while terror gnawed at her insides. Those memories kept her grounded, kept her foundation focused on practical help rather than empty gestures. 1 year after the Washington ceremony, Jennifer received a letter from Marcus, not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter, delivered through his lawyer to ensure she'd receive it. She almost threw it away, unopened, but curiosity won. The letter was short, painful in its forced formality. Jennifer, I've been in therapy for 6 months now, trying to understand why I made the choices I did, why our marriage fell apart, why I treated you the way I did. My therapist suggested I write this letter, not to excuse my behavior, but to acknowledge it. I was wrong about a lot of things. Wrong about the warehouse, obviously, but more wrong about you. I spent our entire marriage seeing you as the problem, as the one holding me back, when really, you were the strength keeping us afloat. I convinced myself that everything I did was justified, that my disappointments were your fault somehow. The warehouse was my final gesture of that delusion, giving you something I thought was worthless, proving one last time that I was the one who'd been burdened. Instead, you proved what I'd always been too blind to see, that you have more integrity, more courage, more wisdom than I ever gave you credit for. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I threw away. And it wasn't a warehouse. Marcus. Jennifer read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. She felt neither triumph nor vindication, just a quiet sadness for all the years they'd wasted, for the love that had curdled into resentment, for the man who'd finally learned the lesson but too late to change anything. She showed the letter to Emma, who'd turned 11 and was developing her own complicated feelings about her mostly absent father. "What does it mean?" Emma asked. "It means he's trying to grow up," Jennifer said simply. "Better late than never." "Does it change anything?" "Not really, but it's still good that he's trying." They had dinner that night in their comfortable home, discussing Emma's upcoming science fair project, the foundation's latest success story, the vacation they were planning for the summer. The conversation was easy, filled with the kind of comfortable silence that comes from knowing someone completely. After Emma went to bed, Jennifer sat in her office and drafted a brief response to Marcus's letter. Not because she needed to, but because closure, she was learning, required both parties to let go. Marcus, thank you for the letter. I'm glad you're working on yourself. I hope you find peace. We're doing well. Emma's thriving. The warehouse turned into something good for a lot of people. I don't think about what might have been anymore. The past is past. I hope you can let it be past too, Jennifer. She sent it through the lawyer, maintaining the professional distance that protected them both from falling into old patterns. Then she closed her laptop and walked through her quiet house, checking locks, turning off lights, performing the small rituals of ending another day. In Emma's room, her daughter slept peacefully, surrounded by books and trophies, and the accumulated evidence of a childhood defined by security rather than struggle. The yellow walls glowed softly in the nightlight, and the maple tree outside rustled gently in the evening breeze. Jennifer stood in the doorway, watching Emma breathe, and felt the full weight of what she'd accomplished. Not the finding of the gold, though that had been extraordinary. Not the museum, or the foundation, or the recognition, though all of those mattered. But this peace, this security, this childhood, Emma would have unmarred by the terror of poverty or the weight of her mother's desperation. She'd inherited a warehouse everyone called worthless. She'd found a fortune everyone had forgotten. And she'd made the choice that had seemed impossible at the time but now felt inevitable. She'd chosen integrity over wealth, transparency over deception, her daughter's respect over her own immediate comfort. And in making that choice, she'd found something more valuable than all the gold in that vault. She'd found herself. Found strength she hadn't known she possessed. Found wisdom born not from education but from surviving and choosing how to survive. Found the ability to look her daughter in the eye and know she'd been exactly who she needed to be. The warehouse still stood on Riverside Road, lights glowing in windows that had once been shattered, voices echoing in halls that had once been silent. Children learned there. Families found hope there. History was preserved there. And somewhere in the city, in a modest house with a yellow bedroom and a maple tree, a mother and daughter slept safely, knowing they'd done something remarkable. They'd found treasure and given it back. They'd faced temptation and chosen integrity. They'd been handed what everyone else called worthless and transformed it into something priceless. The loading dock everyone said would collapse had held $120 million in gold. But the real treasure had been the choice itself, and the life that choice had made possible, a life built on truth rather than lies, on courage rather than fear, on integrity rather than greed. Marcus had given her a warehouse to burden her, to punish her, to prove she'd gotten the worse end of the divorce. Instead, he'd given her the opportunity to prove what she was made of, and she'd proven it, not just to him or to the world, but to herself and to her daughter. That was worth more than all the gold bars in all the vaults in all the world. And as Jennifer finally headed to bed, tired but content, she smiled at the irony of it all. They'd laughed when the divorced mum got only a broken warehouse, but she'd had the last laugh after all. Because sometimes, treasure isn't what you find. Sometimes, it's who you become while you're searching. And sometimes, the most valuable inheritance is the chance to prove your character when it matters most. Jennifer had proven hers, and that made all the difference. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.